Good evening, everybody. How are you all? Hope you're all well. Had a haircut, yes, I know, and I've had a shave, which is a nice, interesting change for anybody. So, welcome to the show. A slight change in plan because with the Fuses live stream, I wanted to bring a professional on, and he's not available this week. So I've decided to. Oh, hello. There's one from last week. I've decided to do this rerun because there was a couple of people that actually made some comments to me about what was about some of the connector things and the connector sounds and stuff. So I thought I'd do a rerun. Please say hi if you're on. It's always nice to see that you're on here. Please say hello and everything. We've got a couple in already. It's nice to see you all. Hello, Jason from Andy. All right, Mr. Maybury. We've got Alex as well. All right, Alex, how are we doing? I hope you're okay. There's some early starters. But yeah, it's nice to all have you on board all the same. And it's great to have you here as well. So let's. Oh, we've got Mick as well. Hi, Mick. How are you, mate? Hope you're well. And we've got Lawrence on as well. Hello, Lawrence. Hope you're well. Oh, Luca. How are you, Luca? Hope you're good as well. So let's just do a few things because I wanted to change it, mix it up a little bit as well. Those of you that have been on the course as well, you might see some things as well. But it'd be really good to keep quiet, let the other guys have a sort of a stab at what we're going to talk about. So let's just crack into the presentation. I'll move myself up there. Oh, where am I going to park myself? There we are. I'll park myself here. It's always good when it's live, isn't it? Really, right? So we go back to this connectors presentation, right? So here's some bits and bobs. So here's a mystery object voice, like a mystery object. Here we go. So I'm going to open up my second cam, right, where all my connectors are. And I'm going to make sure. Can you all hear me? Okay. Because when I switched over to the camera last time, we all lost the music, we all lost sound and everything. So I think I've got it working this week. I think I've actually got it working. And in fact, I'm getting cheeky now. So I reckon if I press this button and that button, look, whoa, I've added myself into there as well. That's really clever, isn't it? Okay, right. But I'm going to disappear off there. So there's really not much point in being there. Okay, so, right. Let's move the connectors because we're going to talk about those in a minute. Excuse the ring marks where I've had my cups of tea as well, if you can see those as well. There we go. Right, so we've got a crimp tool here. Right, and what I want you to do, the first question is, if you can tell me, what is this crimp tool used for? So you can see that there's really, really weird jaws on them. Okay, so hopefully you can see that clear enough on the jaws. So what crimp or what connector is that used for? So that's question number one. Mystery question number one. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay, and the second one is this one. So this is the red one. Okay, so what does this? I have to do me clever little button pushes. What does this one do? So we've got that one. So it's basically, you can see you've just got literally one jaw. Okay. So what is that crimp tool for? Answers? Drop them all in the comments now. Let's have a look and see what comes out of that. Okay. So I'll give you your first one again. Here's your first one. So that's your first That's your first crimp tool, number one. Okay. And then that's your second one. Right. So that's the two there. And then we've got a another question for you, and that was the blue one. What size cable will fit a blue standard terminal? Because this was the one that's caused all the bone of contention, to be honest with you. So, right, here we go. Right, so we're going to talk about it all again. We're going to talk about your standard connectors. We're going to talk about heat shrink connectors. We're going to talk about step downs, which is something you may not have seen. And as I say, this is why I need to go to go through it a little bit more. We've got the heat shrink solder types. We've got a cool seal one, which is a water resistant, waterproof one, and then we've got the solder and heat shrink sort of style connector where you would just normally use heat shrink. And then we'll have some question and answers. So standard connector gauge. So this is across the board anyway. These are the ones for 0.5. So red is 0.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters, and then blue is actually 2.2 millimeters right up to about 3.5 millimeters squared, and then yellow will go 3 millimeters up to 6 millimeters squared. So your standard connectors, let's have a look at them so I can show you those again. We can do a little bit of a demonstration now. So these are your standard sort of connectors, which everybody knows about. That's this sort of style. Standard insulated connector. Okay, there it is there. And they're not waterproof. They're the cheapest of the bunch, but beware of cheap imitations. The cheaper imitation ones, what we're talking about there is ones that just don't crimp the cable properly. Even if you've got it in the right way and you've used the proper crimp tool, it doesn't do what it says on the can, basically. So, yeah, very important to use the right crimp tool. So I'll go back to that crimp tool here. So this is my weapon of choice. And bear in mind, it is a ratchet. So it's a ratchet crimp tool. Ratchet crimp tools are the best to use with any type of connector that you're using, because if you don't use a ratchet style, you can't confirm. If you're just using it with the pressure of your hands, you're never going to get confirmation that it's actually crimped correctly. And then the other thing to sort of mention is that when you are crimping as well, having the right tool, using it the right way as well, of course, because if you looking at the serrations inside there is a certain way that it crimps the cable correctly. And bear in mind that also, as you can see with this one, is it can be adjusted to the right tension, so that you get the right amount of pressure to crimp the tool correctly. Okay, so that's your standard crimp connector. It's what everybody uses. The next one that we've got, obviously you saw me nip off then. The next one that you've got then is the heat shrink. It's accepted by some manufacturers. That's Ford, Jaguar if you use a particular type, I've been told. But these are the sorts of things that we need clarification on. But it seems to be that a lot of the manufacturers are now accepting this heat shrink style, heat shrink crimp tool. Excuse me, heat shrink crimp, basically. So let's have a look at them. We've got the standard one, so that's a standard blade connector. And then we've got a heat shrink ring terminal, and bringing our red crimp tool. This is actually what the crimp tool is for. This is actually a heat shrink crimp connector. A heat shrink crimp tool. So it's a ratchet crimp, and the idea is that it only then crimps, as you can see. Hopefully, if I demonstrate it to you correctly, that it only crimps then the metal part of the heat shrink crimp. If you use a standard insulated one, what you're going to do is you're going to also crimp part of the heat shrink part of it. Now, whether that gets damaged or not, you know, is debatable. And also, you won't get them. Excuse me again, clear my throat. You also won't get the same amount of coverage, because if you can see that that area that it's got there is a lot wider than a standard ratchet crimp. Okay, but please, I'm always interested to see what people have got to say about this. But yeah, that is a heat shrink ratchet crimp tool. Okay. So we now move on to our next ones. Oh, and like I say, correct tooling, using the right ratchet tool is a must for this type of connector as well. One little thing to add to you is that there are heat shrink connectors that you can get out there. So if you are trying to do a splice, or if you are doing a splice, you can use these types of heat shrinks. As you can see, they are step down ones. So you could, oops, I'll put it in picture. So you can see that that's a blue to yellow crimp. This is a blue. I'll put it in the middle properly. This is a blue to red. And so you can see the gauge is blue on that side and red on the other. So that's ideal if you're splicing a connector. So if you're trying to add, as you can see there, if you're trying, not so much for this type of application, but if you're trying to add an extra connector to one side, or an extra cable to one side, then it's quite a good connector to use. I just thought I saw them and I thought that'd be quite a nice sort of addition to the live stream, and do it properly and show you what I mean. So that's the step down. The next type of connector that we've got on board is this one, which is the which is basically the heat shrink, or the heat shrink solder connector. These are new. These are new to me. Even I've not seen these at all. And then all of a sudden, they're everywhere. And there are some manufacturers. I think actually Ford, on the last time we spoke on this, that Ford were looking at these, or they were looking to accept them. Obviously, you come in different shapes and sizes. You've got your yellows, your blues. You've even got a small, really narrow one as well. So that's your really narrow one for joining a very, very small wire. That probably could be ideal for a CAN wire, possibly, if you inadvertently break one. So yeah, that's your that type of heat shrink heat. And to use one of these, you've got to have the right sort of tool. So my suggestion is something like this. This is the eroder one. There are other ones available, but it's got like a catalyst, so it doesn't really, you can see, it doesn't really overheat that much, and it doesn't then overheat the connector too much either. But it's just enough to heat the solder. So that's that connector done. And then we move on to heat shrink, and we talked about this. So obviously, when you're soldering, when you're soldering two connectors together, you want to use heat shrink. And what I'm talking about here is the shrink rate. So if we go to the heat shrink, if I have a look, I'll show you some heat shrink on my little overhead. There's some heat shrink there. And when we talk about the shrink ratio, it's normally on the side of the tube, on the heat shrink tube, and it'll tell you what size it'll go from to. So this is, as you can see, it's 2 to 1. It means it goes from 8mm and it'll shrink right down to 4. But the higher the rating this is, the better. Because obviously, if you've got if you're trying to get a connector in or something, or you're trying to get a wider connector, the higher that ratio. But there is a cost to this. If the higher that ratio, so if you're talking about a 4 to 1 or a 6 to 1, then it costs a lot more. So obviously, this one is a slightly cheaper, cost-effective, should we say, cost-effective heat shrink. Okay. And then, of course, you've got the similar sort of thing is adhesive lined heat shrink. That's to be used outside of the cab or outside the vehicle. Well, then we talk about it being waterproof, and it is fully waterproof. But bear in mind that when they are waterproof, they are actually very, very brittle. Okay, so we're back to the questions and answers. So, did anyone actually give any answers? Alex, I think Alex said non-insulated terminals. Is that what you're talking about, Alex? Is it these that you would say? I would say non-insulated terminals. So is this one non-insulated? Let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the picture. Oh, I can see it. So there it is. Hold on. It's here. It's gone to the floor. So it's this one here. So which one? What is it for? Well, actually, folks, it's for this. It's for a flag connector. Now, again, I've never seen one of these before, but that's the actual crimp tool for a flag connector. As you can see, if I know I'm squeezing it again, but if you see that it actually goes into there. And there it is. That's your crimp tool for a flag connector. And finally, the last one. Well, we saw that earlier in the live stream. That's the heat shrink